Thanks for joining us. This is the Building Open Standards for the Metaverse panel. And we've got 3 panelists and me, a moderator. I'm quickly trying to solve the slight technical issue that I had with the questions. But I'll let you guys introduce yourselves while I do that. I'll start with myself. I'm Anshel Sag, a principal analyst at More Insights and Strategy, and I cover XR space, and I've actually been covering it for over a decade now, in a previous capacity as a journalist, now as an analyst, but I wanted to let you guys introduce yourselves as well. Kavya, you can start.
Thank you, Anshel. And it's an honor to share stage with all of you, most specifically Liz. Neil, we've been on stage quite a few times, and Anshel, yourself. I'm Kavya Perlman. I am the founder and CEO of XR Safety Intelligence, XRSI. We are a SDO, a standard developing organization that is part of Metaverse Standards Forum from the very beginning. And I am also playing a role as a chair for privacy, cybersecurity, and identity exploratory working group at the Metaverse Standards Forum. I've been doing this for, besides Metaverse Standards Forum, I've been advocating for privacy, cybersecurity, safety, overall safeguarding the ecosystem for quite some time. So using that same experience, but also the network of more than over like a 200 very brilliant advisors, Liz being one of them, we tend to just, help build safety in anything, like from technology all the way to regulatory aspects to laws, etc. So, over to you.
Okay, I'll follow up on the XRSI portion here. My name is Liz Rothman. I'm an attorney and advisor with XRSI. I work in sort of the convergence of a lot of AI, XR, and blockchain technologies as they're kind of converging together, and on regulatory and legal aspects of them as a practicing attorney and as an advisor for XRSI.
Cool. It's great to be here. And my name's Neil Trevitt, and my day job is at NVIDIA, where I'm VP of Developer Ecosystems, helping developers use GPUs. But I've been active in the field of open standards for longer than I like to admit. So I've been the chair of the Khronos Group, which is a standards organization, for over 20 years. And Khronos Group have recently catalyzed and bootstrapped the Metaverse Standards Forum, which we'll be talking about, I suspect, in just a moment. And I'm currently serving as the president of the forum too.
Great. Thank you very much for the introductions. And I actually would love to start with you, Neil, specifically on that topic, so you can kind of maybe please give people some idea in the audience, like a quick explanation of what the Metaverse Forum is and kind of what it's about.
Sure. And that was loud. So let me kind of give you the genesis story. I mean, just briefly, because that kind of explains why the forum has been established. So, and actually it's kind of funny, because as soon as people hear that we're associated and working with the Standards Forum, the first question we get asked is, so you're standardizing it, that means you must know what it is. And of course we have no clue, just like everybody else. We don't know what the metaverse is going to be in 20 years' time. But I think the metaverse does have the attention of the industry, because it's bringing together multiple disruptive technologies. It's the AI portion, it's the GPU processing, both the simulation and the graphics. There's XR, obviously here we're at AWE, which is an XR event. There's Web3, there's next generation networking. All of these things are coming together to bring immersive spatial computing to the web. And if you have multiple disparate technologies that need to work together, that's the definition of interoperability. And the best way to deliver interoperability is through interoperability standards. And standards are technical standards, so where an API definition or some kind of contract where two things are agreeing how to communicate. through software calls or some other way of communicating. And there are other aspects of the metaverse. There's the desire, I think, and the dream that we can help different spaces or applications or worlds on the metaverse break out of their vertical silos and begin to communicate to each other, building a larger networked economy than any one space or application can have by itself. And if you want those silos to communicate, that needs interoperability too. And there are also folks who rightly think that the metaverse is likely to be an evolution of the web. And the web, the very definition, it's the world's largest developer platform, built on the very notion of open interoperability standards. So whichever way you come to the metaverse, you need interoperability standards. It's a foundational thing. Enough standards covering enough different domains that we're going to need standards from dozens, if not hundreds, of standards organizations. Khronos is just one. There are many others doing excellent work. XRSI is another. And the organizations that were being approached saying, please help us create the standards that we need to build the metaverse, we suddenly found the need to talk to the other standards organizations, because this is a project and a platform building exercise that's bigger than any one organization. So we looked around and said, well, where can we get together as a standards community? And there wasn't anywhere. And that was the genesis of the Metaverse Standards Forum. It's a very simple idea, a vendor-neutral, welcoming venue where all of the standards organizations can come, communicate, and cooperate over creating the open standards that the metaverse will need, and to have the communication with the larger industry to get their requirements and use cases.
Great. I think that's a pretty good explanation. The other question I had was around the metaverse, because obviously we've been talking about it a lot, and specifically around the hype around the metaverse. And I wanted to kind of get each of your takes on the reality of the metaverse versus the hype as we stand in the current cycle, as well as considering the fact that we've got a pretty big announcement coming next week, which will very likely, maybe kick that hype cycle back into full gear. I'd love to hear your perspective.
Sure, absolutely. So I think I can give you a little bit of legal perspective and then just a personal opinion on it first. I think that we go through these hype cycles and bubbles, and there's always technological advancements that come out of them. There are things that will stick around, and that will be the same here as it is always. But seeing past the overwhelming hype of some of this, of how everything is going to drastically change in a short amount of time, things are changing, but there are certain threads that will continue to grow, and I hope that we can all be part of that, and coming together and trying to build these standards to proactively prevent some of the mistakes that have been made in the past. From a legal perspective, these hype cycles cause a lot of issues because there's a lot of propensity to just move quickly and not worry about breaking things, and then we have to clean up the mess later. And some of the mess that's being created right now is very difficult to clean up and maybe impossible in some senses. And so that's sort of my general take right now.
Yeah. So I would say June 5th, interesting day. I think a lot is going to change. And on that day, we would know whether the industry key players are serious about creating silos, or are they serious about open standards? Because Apple currently holds so much power that they could just literally say, this is the one way to go, the other. And then Metaverse Standards Forum could actually play such an instrumental role that no matter which way they go, we as an industry come together and still say, no, open standards are the way to go. So we'll see, kind of what the indicators are. But I really, Metaverse Standards Forum and so many 2,500 plus organizations from various different domains coming together, that's the hope, to actually reclaim some of that power and control to what happens to this next iteration of the internet.
Oh, so Apple has an event next week? actually have a slightly different view.
Really?
Yeah. I hope, I have no idea, I have no inside knowledge whatsoever, but I hope Apple does announce something, and I hope it's awesome. I think it will be great for the metaverse and actually the standards too, because if Apple do announce something, they'll do a lot of education that's going to lift all the boats. They're going to raise awareness again, which is good, and that will progress how people are going to use this technology. Whether they use open standards or not, all of that is a good thing. And no standards organization, and certainly not the forum, which isn't even a standards organization, it's just a place where the standards organizations are meeting. We have no control, and we shouldn't have control. We shouldn't be able to dictate to anyone whether they use any of the standards that are out there or not. Companies should only use standards when it benefits their business. And you're always going to get a spectrum of companies. Some companies build fabulous business models from having very proprietary platforms, which is perfectly valid. And the other end of the spectrum, you get companies that want to build equally fabulous business models through the networking effect of open standards. The fact you can build the value in your own products by networking with other services and products out there in the market. You don't have to build everything yourself. The responsibility of the standards community is to let the companies that want to be on that end of the spectrum, give them the choice of being able to use effective standards that are available at the right time, at the right place. And, so whatever Apple does, that remains a valid and valuable activity. And we have a kind of a saying in the Khronos Group is every successful open standard has a competitor in a proprietary technology. It seems to be the way of the world. In fact, if you don't have a competitor on the proprietary end of the spectrum, that's when you should start worrying, because it means that there's no one that cares enough about what you're doing to do anything in competition. And finally, if Apple does release something, healthy Darwinian competition is a good thing. I was actually sitting in some of the Khronos sessions upstairs this afternoon, and some of the working group chairs are saying, we had to do OpenXR faster because we're scared of what Apple's going to do. So there you are. Darwinian competition in action. It's going to push the industry forward.
Thank you. I kind of agree with a little bit of everything I've heard. And speaking of hype cycles, I'd love to kind of hear how you guys see AI and how it's foundational to the metaverse, because I think everybody obviously wants to talk about AI, and we've had a lot of talk about AI, but I think we've also had a lot of people talk about how it's relevant to the metaverse, and I'd love to hear your perspective, Kaya, and then maybe Neil.
Well, I'll start with the basic definition of the metaverse. And the story goes back to when we first started, XRSI, when we first started, people were tweeting at each other, like, this is AR, this is MR, this is XR. So XRSI decided to issue a standard, a baseline standard to establish what the term XR means. This was 2019. And over time, people sort of kind of came to agree that this is what, it's an umbrella term, it represents all these three, extension of our reality, etc. So likewise, fairly recently, XRSI released the definition of the metaverse. And this is what we do best, is we need to agree on the key terms so we are speaking the same language. So for some of the outside of the industry folks, they're thinking, oh, the AI is there, so metaverse is dead. And I'm sure many of you have seen the articles and whatnot. According to XRSI and our standard definition, based on so much of consulting, advisory, and observation from the industry, it's a convergence, exactly what Neil said. I was smiling because that is precisely what the standard definition suggests. It is the convergence of XR, AI, higher computing processing power, high network bandwidth, etc. DLT, we call it, decentralized ledger technologies. I would go as far as, and that is part of the standard technology, is robotics. So convergence of these technologies will bring us there. So now that's why when this whole hype of the AI is happening and people are talking about ChatGPT, et cetera, I believe that's a critical technology to actually realize the true potential of the metaverse. And that's what would enable us to potentially, when we can speak the virtual world into existence. What's my worry as a cybersecurity professional? When you can speak your virtual world into existence, you can also hack it. When you can speak your virtual world into existence, you can also give this algorithm so much more information without informed consent. So what happens to privacy? That's where we spend, at Metaverse Standards Forum, we meet time and time again to try to scope out that, okay, this artificial intelligence and DLT and all these technologies are evolving. So what happens to cybersecurity? What happens to privacy? So firstly, for me, the challenge is only because, my expertise is cybersecurity and it's not literally AI, but we ought to be thinking about what about AI safety? Where should these ethics lie and how should we be making standardized decisions that drive the industry forward? So earlier, Neil, you said that, something that benefits the company. And sometimes that benefits the company does not take into account human well-being. Connecting people at any cost benefits the company. And so when that's the approach, that's something I also personally and professionally kind of have a little bit of hesitation. I think with the metaverse, and especially with the convergence of AI, we have to be thinking about human in the loop, and we have to be thinking about society in the loop. The whole society will be impacted. And that's why, as long as benefit includes building trust with human beings, as long as benefit includes trying to avoid scandals like Cambridge Analytica because of lack of privacy stuff, those are the things. And I believe that AI has a tremendous role in helping us do just that.
Sure, I can. So I think kind of building off of what Kavya has been saying, and from the legal point of view, there are a lot of issues that so AI will certainly be, part of XR environments, right? We know that in digital worlds that are being built, it will be kind of foundational to a lot of those worlds, and the data collection that is coming into these systems that can then be fed back into algorithms that can have real-time responses when we're looking at content regulation and privacy laws and trying to determine how to best structure these things to protect individual autonomy and free speech, while also preventing, overreach of these systems or any kind of manipulation that could happen when there is AI kind of integrated into these systems. These are all big questions that we're going to be struggling with for some time, I think, but getting a proactive look at them as we are building these worlds is incredibly important.
Yeah, I think AI is going to be central and essential to the metaverse, and I agree that the potential for danger is high. So it's been one of my personal journeys being involved with the forum is having the pleasure and honor of meeting guys like you who are actually been worrying about this for many years. It's it's good to have you on our side. It's going to be essential. From the engineering point of view, I think it is a big misunderstanding to say, okay, the AI is the hot new thing, therefore the metaverse is not relevant anymore, because they are inextricably linked. I think of all those technologies that we kind of went through right at the beginning, bringing them all together, I do think AI probably is the most significant as we figure out this new generation of platform that we're all going to be using, because it is most general purpose and potentially far-reaching. And I know this is an XR conference, but I think AI is more significant probably than even XR. A lot of the proto-metaverses, people aren't using XR devices yet. XR will deliver some of the most immersive experiences, but it's not central to many use cases. And AI is going to be foundational, I think, to the metaverse, because so many things that I think people have as a dream are going to be finally enabled by AI. Natural user interfaces, speech, gestures, eye tracking, all of this stuff is going to be enabled by UI. Semantic scene understanding, you saw the Niantic demo earlier this morning, all powered by AI. Understanding, it's on grass, it can find food. Okay, now it's all being driven by AI. And AI is, though, a real potential for both good and danger for the end users. So it is really good that we're thinking really seriously early about the potential downsides as well as the upsides. I think the industry seems to be primed to be thinking seriously about that, because we've all we're still living through Web 2.0 and the social media and all the upsides and downsides of that. So that's a good thing. I think the industry is open to bringing those considerations to the fore.
And Angela, if I may add to that just a little bit, because I see a novelty also happening here. Prior to this AI and XR convergence, the maximum, as far as we've gone, is interacting with non-playing characters in video games. We have never necessarily, interacted with embodied artificial intelligence agent, but this is already happening. So as humans and societies, these are the type of novel standards that must be set. For example, just a simple example is like if an artificial intelligence agent potentially, or an algorithm, or a robot driven by AI is performing a medical operation, and the doctor is using some of that information to do some immersive, coordination, et cetera. It's okay to not know that, this is all back end, front end is done by AI. But however, if you're in a social environment, in an immersive world, and an artificial intelligence agent is acting like a real human and is constantly manipulating you, we really need standards there to ensure that people know or they don't know. Even if the company says, hey, we're not going to declare that we're using AI agents to sell you and manipulate you to the extent that we will manipulate your political views so that maybe your world views. So this is a very novel territory and kind of intersections where we got to pause a little bit and think about, what about humans? This is something we've never done. And I think that's another novelty of intersection where we can, with the companies, with the technology companies that are developing, with the SDOs, and even with the lawmakers, sit around and think about this, what comes next, what becomes of it. And that can only happen through setting the standards and understanding these are the standards that we're working with base.
And I think it's important that it's something that's never been done, but it's also never been more important. So you can kind of push everything off on personal responsibility and say, oh, well, people should know if there are ads coming at them. But in an immersive environment, there may be no way to tell. And so in this environment in particular, you can't, there's some of that argument I think goes away where, well, people have to be smart and they have to navigate, the world on their own. And if they fall for scams or whatever, then it's their issue. But here we're running into a situation where you will not be able to tell if you're actually dealing with an AI agent. You won't be able to tell who's controlling that AI agent. You won't be able to tell what data they're collecting and maybe reflecting back to you so quickly that that it's actually controlling your responses. And so it's never happened, but also never been more important to look at these issues.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think one of the things that we heard yesterday was that XR is like the interface to AI. So, there's going to be a lot of things with XR that will be supercharged by AI, like Neil was saying, in terms of all the technologies. And I think that kind of maybe leads us into some of the pain points that these AI capabilities might expose even further. So I was kind of curious, what are some of the pain points of the metaverse today, and maybe what advances do we need to make those more widespread, or how do we deal with them as part of the Metaverse Standards Forum?
When it comes to pain points, I should totally go first. I'm like so many. But I think the one that I think we must immediately resolve is related to children. And I'm actually, proudly in the background as XRSI and inevitably and obviously through Metaverse Standards Forum, advising some of the Congress people and some regulators around the globe to make laws that manipulating children through extended reality interfaces using generative AI just must not be allowed. It must be banned. Why? Because, well, first of all, they're developing brains. So should we humans teach our children what becomes of them, or should we give that responsibility to artificial intelligence? That's a very huge question we humans ought to be asking us that. So that's a real big pain point as to more and more our children, the younger generation, gets exposed to this AI and XR intersection, what becomes of their brain? Because this convergence has a way more visceral impact on their brain than what we have had with social media, which potentially, and in some cases, resulted into mental health crisis. So this is very, very important, and it's a pain point today. And I'll start with that, and just, there are tons of others.
If I can really quickly add on to that, and that, so it's super important to focus on children and their the interactions in these environments and what is not allowed. We also run the risk of possibly regulating children out of the metaverse at this point, because we need to strike a balance where we can still have everybody in an inclusive way involved in these technologies. And if countries go the way of passing laws that just make it so that no children under 13 can be involved in any of these platforms, then we'll also have other issues that will come up.
I totally agree, yeah, that's a really good point. And so outright ban, yeah.
There's also a lot of children who love participating in XR, and they're probably the biggest fans of XR.
Yeah, the younger generation live in XR, or XR, or at least in 3D, the Roblox and Fortnite, much more than the older generation. But it is really important what you're both saying, and I can reinforce that, because when we set up the forum, the first thing we did was poll the members. We have 2,500 members now. It was like over 1,500 members when we started polling, asking them, what are your pain points? And actually to find real-time data as to what's really important to the members. And we've been continually upvoting, downvoting. So we asked for these topics. We immediately got a list of over 200 topics, and we brought them into domains that kind of naturally grouped themselves into domains. So now we have a prioritized list of the topics, and fairly near the top of the list are kind of the engineering topics that you'd expect. And it's an interesting list. So interoperability of 3D assets, both from the 3D graphics point of view and from the IP, more the Web3 IP rights point of view, interoperable avatars and wearables, and how to have digital twins and integrate the real and virtual worlds, XR and user interface. Not too surprising that these are key technical areas that people want to have good standards to build their opportunities. But to what Carrie and Liz have been saying, right at the top of that list, by quite a wide margin too, was privacy, cybersecurity, and all the related issues around making the metaverse safe and inclusive. It was initially a shock, frankly, but now I've come to realize it's a pleasant surprise, again, that the industry is kind of primed to really take this whole safety issue seriously.
Neil, I remember telling you, I'm like, please don't let it be just consensus. People are going to put privacy last. And you're like, no.
They didn't, right?
Exactly.
And Neil deserves, Neil and a few others that were kind of managing this process early on deserve a tremendous amount of credit, because with 2,500 members coming in, and there were spreadsheets that were just like, there were so many entries, and and to navigate that whole process and then weed it down to what was kind of crucially important to all members of the group was quite an animal to tackle, and you all did it with grace.
Yeah. It's no surprise that XRSI is like 100% supporter, because this is certainly, it's our mission.
Yeah, about that specific topic with having 2,500 members, how do you get agreement and make forward progress in that kind of a environment?
Yes, I mean, because it is an interesting potential problem. I mean, and it is actually interesting. We've looked around, really seriously looked around for other domains that have tried this level of coordination between standards organizations in the industry, because we wanted to learn from them, you know, if the folks that have done this before, and we seriously found no one. So we're kind of figuring out how to do this as we go along. The spreadsheets is mentioned there, you know. And the danger for chaos is quite high, because the metaverse, you know, the 20-year plan, we don't have one. You know, the end goal is not defined, and we have a lot of participation. So, you know, the potential for chaos is pretty high. So we were pretty careful to set up this 3-step process, you know, polling for the topics, grouping into domains, and then using that prioritized list to prioritize what working groups we form. So having 2,500 companies in a single working group, you know, is not workable. So we have tried our best to slice and dice that priority list to have a list of working groups that can focus in on a manageable chunk of work, and where there are enough companies that are interested to have a useful quorum, but not so many companies that, you know, nothing will ever get decided. And so far, more my luck than judgment probably, but we've ended up, you know, with a pipeline of 16 or so working groups, you know, addressing those kind of domains that we were going through before. And typically, you know, the working groups are a normal standards organization kind of size, you know, 20 to 50 people coming in every 2 weeks typically, and, you know, having quite grounded, pragmatic discussions around what can we do, not to solve the metaverse in 20 years' time, but what are the interoperability and standardization opportunities that we can help solve right now, you know, make a difference today, because that will create the forward momentum to keep doing it as we follow the path, you know, wherever the metaverse road takes us.
And, you know, one other thing that Metaverse Standards Forum, alongside those things, is the oversight committee. And I love that aspect of, you know, allowing certain specific companies that really double down on what direction we go to, and either they are paying or through their standard, or, you know, whatever authority they want to maintain through Metaverse Standards Forum, are really gauging and guiding and navigating together. So there is a subgroup which oversight, and that's really helpful to manage that much of a larger group.
Yeah, and I also wanted to drill in a little bit more deeply on specific groups. So Kavya, you're chairing the Privacy, Ethics, Identity Exploratory Group within the Metaverse Standards Forum. So I'd love to know, what are the goals of this group, and why is the work so critical?
Okay, so first of all, as we were talking about managing consensus, privacy, not ethics, cybersecurity and identity group is the prime example of how challenging can it be. So if you look at our privacy, cybersecurity, identity group, the timeline itself, we first came up with a sort of a tentative charter to be like, hey, we intend to be a group. And then we are now in the process of, with over 200 member organizations, including Meta, Microsoft, you name it. Apple's missing, but that could change. So these organizations are now thinking about, okay, what of privacy in the metaverse as, you know, a singular domain, but they're also considering topics interconnected adjacent domains like child safety, like UI UX, other different things. So privacy itself poses a opportunity to do things differently. Traditionally, for example, it's always been driven by regulation. But regulatory folks a little bit, not only behind, but they're also a little bit distant from the technology stack. So Metaverse Standards Forum, here we have assembled these multidisciplinary folks. We can actually inform and standardize in a way that, okay, we need to have context, we need to have choice, we need to have control, just checking the box. while you're obtaining information is not going to be enough. So these kinds of things. So sort of like changing the approach to privacy is what I'm hoping. But then we have cybersecurity, and there's a lot of overlap. How we do things, that requires cybersecurity aspects of securing data at rest. What kind of data should be on device? What kind of data should be not on device, but how should it be secure? Is there a component to cloud to what's happening? So those are the aspects. I'm sure not this year, but at some point, we would also be looking at cyber offense and cyber defense within the context of metaverse. We'll get there. You know, there will be novel type of cyber attacks where people move a subject, a human subject, without the permission. Those are things that exist in proof of concept. But then is finally identity. Now, this is unique for Metaverse Standards Forum because identity, while we may never develop, you know, itself the standards, but European Commission or Europeans are coming out with self-sovereign identity protocols. There are groups in Japan that are also using some other protocols. So we kind of can help help them interact with each other. And that's the goal of the identity protocol. That's very personal to me personally, because if we don't get identity right, it could lead to all the way to genocide. And so identity is a very key subject. We even try to kind of like, hey, this is too much, but it is so important for the Metaverse Standards Forum members that we have to keep it, and then we try to address it. So those are the ways we're trying to tackle. Hopefully by the end of June, we would send the charter to Oversight Committee and then basically get to work, start executing in a project way to how to address privacy for metaverse, cybersecurity, and then identity.
That's a great explanation. And I have a question actually for Liz. I mean, related to this, because in the short time that the forum has been operating, in my personal interactions with folks, you know, and with the help of Caviar and other colleagues, you know, really raising this whole issue, I've kind of detected a change in kind of attitude to this. Before it was the typical engineer, I know, a geek response is, oh, you know, regulation, that's going to stop us doing things. I'm kind of seeing it as turning around, saying, actually, we need the regulators to create us a safe space that we can do something that's worthwhile, you know, without getting all the downsides. Are you seeing that?
So I think that there is certainly, I mean, with congressional hearings going on and Sam Altman in front of, you know, in Congress and the EU AI Act, I think that there's a lot of interest right now in regulation. And it does, for businesses, it certainly creates a situation where you have regulatory clarity, you can move forward in a way where there's certainty that what you will do will not create liability for you in a year, in 5 years, and 10 years down the line. And so those sort of things can sometimes be inhibitory of innovation, where you have to follow some regulations, but it also provides a lot of clarity, and that can, you know, especially for larger businesses, but even smaller businesses as well, you really don't want to just throw yourself into the muck and then have to, you know, kind of clean it up later, as I said before. So I think that as people see that it's possible to have whether or not we can do it in a reasonable amount of time, or before these sort of technologies really hit the market is a question, but it's possible to have sensible regulation. And I hope adaptable regulation where we can continue to look at the technologies as they are and build upon the regulations that are there and continually check in with them to make sure that what we've done is actually working for individuals, for industry, for, you know, for everybody in society as a whole. So I think that the tide has shifted a bit in that way. I also think that there is, you know, there are three of us on the stage, and if you asked us for a definition of standards, we would give you a different answer, right? From cybersecurity, legal, or developer perspective, we don't have a really good common language, and there are so many different kinds of standards, and there's not a good understanding of what each sector needs to really get a handle on. And so if there's not an individual understanding, then there is certainly not a collective understanding. And I think that's somewhere that the Metaverse Standards Forum can really push forward and create some of this common vocabulary and bring together such a multidisciplinary team to let people know that are developing these technologies that may just want to, you know, develop them quickly or collect all the data because it's more interesting and they can create an experience, and but they're not thinking about the implications of that later on, you can bring together people that can really share experience and say, well, hang on, you may want to develop this in a way that's not just collecting everything, but let's think about it and let's tailor to what we actually are looking for here. And it may actually end up creating a better product in the end because you're not just sort of haphazardly developing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, we have this on, it's becoming an ongoing joke now, but you know, what we want from the technical community, you know, is for the conversations to evolve, where we want to know what we need to do to help, right? What does the regulatory and the whole safety community, what mechanisms do we need in the technical interoperability standards to enable whatever, you know, collectively we decide, you know, to keep everyone safe? It really is, we're, I think, really looking forward to that.
That perfectly wound into my next question, so I'm not even going to ask it. But one of the questions I had was, there are many metaverse organizations being set up by the World Economic Forum, the ITU, IEEE, and others. What are some of the ways that the forum will relate or compete with these organizations to, you know, get us over the line? Who knows when?
So the Metaverse Standards Forum doesn't compete with those organizations. So that's the first thing. You know, if people remember only one thing from about the forum from this conversation, it's the forum is not yet another standards organization that you're not talking to. It's just a forum where all the standards organizations and the industry can come together. And that includes you know, organizations like ITU and IEEE, that they're welcome to join the forum. It's neutral territory. We're not a standards organization. All of those organizations are standards organizations. So the way I like to, and again, no one has quite tried anything like this before, so it is a little bit weird. But the best way I've come to describe it is the forum exists to accelerate the mission of its member organizations, like XRSI, like IEEE, who are a member. We're very different organizations. There's no direct competition. IEEE will continue to create, you know, awesome standards. But if we can be helpful to an organization like IEEE, because, you know, they can get broader input and requirements from the whole industry, talking to folks that they wouldn't normally get the chance to talk to, and get visibility for, you know, the good work that they're doing, then the forum has fulfilled its purpose. And there are there are hundreds of organizations out there that are trying to do good work, and, you know, the forum exists to try accelerate, you know, their mission.
Great, and I was going to say.
Yeah, just a little bit to add to that. So not only is Metaverse Standards Forum not competing at all, but trying to bring collaboration and introduce collaboration, but there's a very critical aspect that I've personally noticed and advocated and has been heard, which is inclusion. And so, yes, no competition with the larger entities that are doing similar type of work or developing standards, but also kind of going out of the way to ensure there is equity for, we're not a big company, SDO like IEEE, we're a small XRSI nonprofit, we're global, but going out of the way to create that equity and inclusion, all the way to even smaller organization, so their voices are also kind of heard. And that goes as far as creating even, you know, financial sort of incentives. So if some organization are just not capable to do any financial views or something. So when these decisions are being made at Metaverse Standards Board, you know, Forum Board, they are thinking about this. So not just competition, but also going out of the way and extending it to all the way being very inclusive organization.
And fast moving and connected to the industry. And I think that, I mean, when we first started talking to organizations like ITU, you know, which are hundreds of years old, and we're just a few months on. So why do you want to cooperate with us? And then, you know, they are an organization that can do tremendous good in the world. And they're the standards organization for United Nations. but having a much more agile, industry-connected, fast-moving organization that's elbow deep in the day-to-day, it can add value to what they're trying to do. So it's actually quite an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, and I just want to say thank you, but I also wanted to ask each of you your kind of final thoughts about, just in general, building the open metaverse and how that relates to the forum, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, Elizabeth.
Sure. So thoughts on building the open metaverse. It's from a legal perspective, we are recreating our lives sort of in physical realm, in a digital realm. And that means that almost every law that we touch in a physical realm will apply in a digital realm, possibly in a slightly different way. So intellectual property rights, contract law, content regulation, free speech laws, where else are we? Privacy, security, cybersecurity. I mean, like, it's just, everything that we do, we have to think about. And as you're developing things, especially in XR, you are thinking about that. You're thinking about how am I going to bring this thing from real life into this digital world. And when you're thinking about those things and building the actual components of them, you also have to think about the laws that'll go along with it, and what the impacts will be of what is being built on the individuals, the end users of the products. And then also companies have to think about their own liability in these situations. And yeah, I really think that, this requires, it is always difficult to, a lot of people's eyes still glaze over, as we all know, when you talk about these kind of technologies, and that is certainly the case for regulators and most attorneys. But there are ways to bridge these gaps, these barriers of technological knowledge. One of them is by explaining things in terms that are sort of as relatable and to common people as possible, and there's a technological barrier a lot of times that people just cannot get past. But I think that we could do a better job as an industry of explaining things in ways that people from across disciplines can understand. And that's one of the things I think that the Metaverse Standards Forum can really help with is, again, kind of creating this common vocabulary where we can move forward and look at all these issues in a more holistic and comprehensive way.
Yeah, here. I don't know where the metaverse is going to take us, but it's going to take us somewhere interesting. I mean, asking someone today, what is the metaverse going to be in 20 years is like sitting someone down in front of the Netscape browser in 1994, with one page of text, probably flashing, and asking them to imagine something like Amazon or Uber and the disruptive potential of those evolutions of the web. It's just impossible to figure out where this is going to take us, but it's going to be an interesting wavefront of commercial opportunity that brings us further and further down that path. So I don't know what the metaverse is going to be, but I do firmly believe it's going to be a better and safer place if we work together to build it.
Absolutely. And talking about safety, so lastly, I've literally, if any of you are connected with me on LinkedIn, my last name, I've changed it to safety first. But I believe that metaverse, going into the metaverse to create, to connect, to do commerce, to do all these fun stuff, medical assessment, learning, education, we are literally extending our perceived reality into another dimension. So NASA has this standards, actually. They're called TRLs, Technology Readiness Levels. So I personally, and I think hopefully this will extend further of the belief, is that when we extend our reality into another dimension, we want to be as safe as extending to going to space. Because when things break in space, there isn't much time to regroup and do things. So you have to prevent and get the highest technology readiness levels because it's $1 million at stake and whatnot. But in this case, we have human in the loop again. We have society in the loop. So that's why I believe that the open standards for that level of a safety, that level of interoperability with safety baked in, with privacy baked in, is going to play a huge role. And we should be asking for that type of, or levels of technology readiness levels. And that can only come from this type of a collective effort.
Thank you very much, guys. We have about 5 minutes left for questions. So if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Do we have a mic runner or just point to people?
There's a mic on the seat. There's a mic on the seat right there.
Thank you for grabbing it, I appreciate
We
it.
are not there yet.
Somebody in this room is probably working on it, though.
Can you guys hear me? Yeah.
Oh, there we go, thank you.
Okay, so this is great. Laws, stuff. It sounds like supervillains are going to show up here, though. You guys tell me some supervillains. What do we do with, it's a slightly controversial question, but so we have laws, and then we have all these comic book movies. Do we have superheroes? If the digital agents are trying to manipulate my children, am I going to have the laws helping me? The standards are helping me. But does there need to be something else? Do we need to think about like actually some kind of guardian angel type of a deal for this, right? Because who's going to be able to be in cyberspace all the time?
Yeah, who's going to police it?
And beyond policing, right? Because policing comes from you're enforcing a policy or you're devastating someone because that policy is bad. But can we imbue the spirit that you all are displaying into these agents as well? Because people are made hustle GPT. So can we make guardian angel GPT? And do we need to?
These are complicated. This could go in many directions. As you continue to talk, I just thought in many different directions of who should be the one to field this first. But I hope it's possible, right? I hope that there's a way that we can create, because it is true that we talk about AI regulation, but we're going to be a situation where AI becomes the regulator, and in those situations, you're even into more. There's a lot more concerns that you need to look at. So perhaps that could be. I do think that. What we may be looking at legally here is actually an international treaty among countries, because harmonization of laws across the globe is going to be incredibly important in these areas. And looking at all the different regulations that may be sort of over-defining AI and over-defining some of these technologies to future-proof the regulations going forward. Sometimes when you do that, you end up with technologically neutral laws that don't actually regulate anything. And so from my point of view, the guardian angel may be some sort of joint international effort and maybe an international treaty on these issues.
And until we get there, John, this is a very good question, because until we get there, what we can do is something, at XRSI, we started the XRSI Privacy and Safety Framework. So within the context of standards and the laws, and then the guardian that you're talking about, I completely agree. We're absolutely, inevitably are going to need those type of guardians, not just one, but many. And we are going to have to train them then on these types of very granular type of frameworks, and that would drive even the, when we were saying, oh, ban on children, no, but that would be trained to abide by parents' consents and all these things. And we can do that. And that's the only way to scale safety once we are actually in the metaverse and living lives across.
Yeah, guardian AIs is an awesome idea. And I think one of the most important things we can do right now is establish the social norms for all of us in this room. In the trenches, the software engineers developing these AI systems, how are we going to stop them hallucinating stuff? How are we going to be able to ensure that they're a guardian, not a hustler? We need folks. We don't know the answers, right? So we need folks right now really putting that at the top of the priority list. So establishing those social norms as well as legislation is one of the most essential things we can do, I think.
I think we have time for one more question, a short one. Please.
Can you run the mic over?
Make it quick.
On Salt and Parallel Worlds. So in relation to kind of a follow-up to what John was talking about, is it incumbent upon the regulators or is it more incumbent upon the platforms to really start sussing this stuff out? Because the biggest challenge that you're looking at right now, and we saw this with OpenAI, is they'll educate Congress, and Congress just sits there and is quizzical. But the platforms themselves are the ones that, we saw this in Web 2, they weren't doing it. What are your thoughts on that for Web 3?
So quickly from the legal standpoint, I think regulation is slow. Don't count on it being the guardian angel anytime soon. I think it will happen eventually, and these threats will be taken seriously, and also the the positive, things that come out of these technologies will be taken seriously, and people will see the impact of them. But as far as like sorry, what was the second part of your question? I just lost my train of thought. Right, so self-regulation. So for sure, that is what this group should be looking at is some sort of self-regulation, and that's exactly where the Metaverse Standard Forum fits in, and XRSI fits in, and building and looking at these issues critically up front will be very important.
It literally reminds me of one of the projects that at XRSI, we even named it as shared responsibility model. We're only scoping it for enterprise XR, but that's precisely what it is. And none of this would have been possible because we really don't have access to that many companies directly. And through Metaverse Standard Forum, some of these work can actually be enabled, where we can actually talk to NVIDIA, we can talk to Qualcomm. So it's actually a shared responsibility among several stakeholders, and including the person who is in the metaverse experience. Like, if you're going to shout out your social security number, well, then it's not the company's responsibility to safeguard your private data. You literally put it in public. So those are kind of norms exactly that, Neil earlier said. We need to figure out those boundaries, like when the data leaves the headset, whose responsibility is it to secure it? Is it the cloud company's responsibility? Is it the platform, et cetera?
I think ensuring safety is going to be a team sport. It needs everyone who can help to help together, and we need to, again, establish the social norms and the expectation that it's not someone else's responsibility, it's all our responsibility.
Thank you very much, guys. We're a little over, but appreciate the questions, and thank you so much for the panelists.